Right now, somewhere on the ocean, a steel heart the size of a 4-story building has not stopped beating in weeks. You turn off your car just to run into a shop, so why does this heart never stop? Behind that question lies a ruthless calculation. That heart breathes inside one of the 62,000 large ships crossing the planet's oceans. Today, it does not shut down during the 30 days it takes to sail from China to Europe. It does not shut down even when the ship is anchored, motionless, waiting its turn. A multi-million euro engine roars in total stillness, burning tons of fuel without moving a single meter. From the outside, it looks like pure waste. But behind this madness lies a cold calculation that changes everything. Why would a captain burn expensive fuel instead of switching off the engine and saving money? What happens if that heart stops in the middle of the ocean? And above all, why? Does silence cost more than the roar? The answer flips the normal logic upside down. On the high seas, silence is more expensive than noise. By the end, you'll know the only rule that allows this heart to stop, and the true story of 1,373 people who came within a single hole's width of disaster. To understand that calculation, we first have to go below deck and meet the protagonist. The engine room of a large ship is not a room. It is an industrial steel structure as tall as a 4-story building. Metal staircases and walkways surround it on every side. At its center, the main engine. There are no spark plugs here, no compact pistons like the ones in your car. Everything here is measured on another scale entirely. The cylinder is so wide an adult can stand inside it with room to spare. Technicians literally work inside the engine itself. It can have 6 cylinders, 8, or, in the largest ships, up to 14. Each piston weighs several tons and turns a crankshaft that alone weighs hundreds of tons. The most powerful engine ever installed on a ship weighs over 2,000 tons and produces more than 107,000 horsepower. And yet it spins at barely 102 revolutions per minute. Your car idling at a red light already spins faster than that. This giant is one of a kind. There is no spare engine. If a pump fails, another kicks in. But if the heart fails, there is no second heart. It is the only force capable of moving tens of thousands of tons of metal and cargo. And here's a common misconception worth clearing up. This engine does not generate the ship's electricity. Smaller auxiliary engines handle that. The main engine has one job only: move the ship forward. Here's something even more surprising. This colossus burns the dirtiest fuel that exists, yet its thermal efficiency exceeds 50%. Half of the fuel's energy converts into real motion. A normal car engine barely reaches 30%. It is technically the most efficient combustion engine ever built by human beings. But to stay alive, it needs to be fed. And what it eats looks nothing like what goes into your car's fuel tank. To understand why, we need to rewind a little. It all began with the wind. Sailing ships depended on a free but unpredictable force. In the 19th century, steam arrived, and with it, the first sacred rule of navigation was born. The boiler could never be allowed to cool mid-voyage. Rebuilding pressure from zero cost hours of brutal labor for the stokers. So the boiler stayed alive day and night. In the 20th century came the diesel engine, capable of burning much heavier, cheaper fuels than coal. From the 1960s onward, that black, almost waste-like residue left behind by refineries became the king fuel of global shipping. Nobody wanted to throw it away, and engines learned to digest it. With it came the closed-loop system ships still use today, a fuel that needs constant heat to flow, steam that depends on the running engine itself, and a starting sequence with a strictly limited number of attempts. That inheritance was cheap, but it hit a trap. Nobody noticed until the day somebody decided to shut the engine off. And that trap is exactly why turning off the engine can kill the ship. The fuel powering these giants looks nothing like the diesel in your car. Picture fresh asphalt just laid on a road, a black dense almost solid mass. That's heavy fuel oil, the final, cheapest residue left over from refining crude petroleum. At 15 degrees Celsius, it has the exact consistency of tar. The only way to move it through pipes is to heat it, and not just a little. In the storage tank, it's kept around 40 degrees, just enough to flow with difficulty. From there, it moves to a settling tank, where it's heated further and cleaned of impurities. And right before entering the engine, it's raised to around 140 degrees. Only then is it liquid and atomized enough to burn properly and completely. The entire ship is threaded with kilometers of piping. Wrapped in steam coils, a giant floating double boiler, active 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And where does all that steam come from? From a boiler that captures the engine's own exhaust heat. Heat that comes practically free while the ship is underway. There's also a second auxiliary boiler with its own independent combustion chamber ready for whenever the first one isn't enough. While the engine is running, the cycle costs almost nothing. The engine heats the boiler heats the fuel, and the fuel feeds back into the engine, a perfect circle that sustains itself. Now stop that engine in the middle of the ocean and watch closely what happens next. Imagine you're the one in command on the bridge. You decide to shut down the main engine to save fuel during a wait. Silence falls over the entire ship. The heat from the exhaust gases vanishes instantly, and now the entire burden of keeping the fuel warm falls alone on the auxiliary boiler. As long as that boiler keeps running, the fuel stays liquid. But if anything fails, steam pressure starts dropping, the heating system stops, and the fuel slowly begins to thicken inside pipes, pumps, and filters. In the worst case, it turns into an almost solid block, jammed exactly where it's needed. Sometimes more than 1,000 miles from the nearest port capable of repairs. Even if it doesn't fully solidify, restarting the whole system takes hours, raising steam pressure step by step, reheating kilometers of cold piping, purging air from the lines. It's nothing like flipping a switch. It's a long, delicate operation that burns fuel without covering a single mile just to bring the system back to life. The small savings from shutting down evaporate the moment you try to restart, and the captain knows it. That's why almost nobody dares to try it on the high seas. But reheating the fuel is by far the easy part of the problem, because waking up an engine weighing thousands of tons is nothing like turning a key. No electric starter motor exists or could exist capable of turning a crankshaft that weighs hundreds of tons. So these giants wake up in a completely different way, with a blast of compressed air at around 30 bar of pressure. A special valve lets the air rush directly into the cylinder, slamming the piston downward with brutal force, forcing the crankshaft to spin faster and faster, cylinder after cylinder, in a perfectly synchronized sequence until the engine reaches enough revolutions to start burning fuel on its own. But that compressed air stored in huge steel bottles isn't infinite. Maritime classification rules require the reserve to be enough for at least 12 consecutive starts on reversible engines and 6 on non-reversible ones. Just 12 bullets to bring a heart of steel back to life in the middle of nowhere. And a cold engine with thick fuel and oil as dense as cold grease doesn't always start on the first try. Every failed attempt burns through one bullet of that limited reserve. If the crew exhausts all 12 and the compressors haven't had time to recharge the bottles, the ship goes adrift. An iron island, defenseless, rocked by wind and waves, unable to restart its own heart, waiting for a tugboat that could take days to arrive. And even a successful restart leaves permanent scars. Waking a cold engine suddenly is a brutal thermal shock. For the metal, enormous pieces of steel and cast iron, freshly cooled, absorb all the heat of combustion in mere seconds. That sudden change creates invisible microcracks, accelerates wear, and drastically shortens the life of extremely expensive parts. Replacing a single-cylinder liner alone can take several days of specialized labor and cost tens of thousands of euros in parts. And manpower. Every shutdown and restart cycle slowly kills the engine from the inside, and that bill always arrives separately. And there's still a third factor, the one almost nobody mentions first: time. In shipping, time is literal money, and a lot of it. A large vessel is chartered by the day, like a giant rental car. A medium-sized bulk carrier can cost between 13,000 and 21,000 euros a day just in charter fees. Large container ships easily exceed 70,000 euros a day, with recent historic spikes of 150,000 euros a day. Its route is scheduled down to the minute. At the destination port, a crane is already reserved, dock workers are already hired, the next cargo is already queued. If it misses its berthing window, it waits in line for hours, sometimes days, burning fuel without unloading a single container. On March 23, 2021, a single 400-meter ship ran aground diagonally and blocked the Suez Canal for 6 full days. According to the shipping publication Lloyd's List, the jam held up roughly $9.6 billion in trade every single day, with nearly 185 ships waiting in line on both sides of the canal. Factories without parts, stores without stock, containers that never arrived anywhere on time. One single stranded ship can paralyze half the planet's commerce for days. That's exactly why ship owners have run the numbers, calculator in hand. Keeping the engine turning without stopping is almost always the cheapest and most predictable option available. So how much does it actually cost to keep this heart beating day and night without rest? Let's run the real current numbers. A bulk carrier cruising at a relaxed pace of around 12 knots burns about 30 tons of fuel a day. At current market prices, that's between 13,000 and 16,000 euros a day, over 400,000 euros a month. Just for the main engine, a large container ship can burn up to 225 tons a day. At full speed, the equivalent of nearly 6,500 full tanks of an average car every single day. It sounds insane until you compare it to the cargo it's carrying, goods worth hundreds of millions of euros stacked on deck, and a daily charter rate that already dwarfs that fuel cost several times over. Shutting down the engine to save a few tons and risking all that accumulated value isn't savings. It's pure financial recklessness. On top of that, an engine running at a constant, steady rhythm wears out far more slowly than one that's constantly switched on and off. Today, every cylinder is practically a miniature computer, measuring its own internal pressure and fine-tuning combustion in real time, down to the millimeter. But there's one reason to never shut it off that appears in no financial report, no spreadsheet, anywhere. Imagine you're on the bridge yourself, in the middle of a storm, at night. A ship's rudder only truly works when water is flowing forcefully along the hull. If the engine stops, the ship loses speed and becomes little more than a log at the mercy of the waves. As long as the engine drives the propeller, the captain can keep the bow pointed directly into the swell, the only position that lets the ship cut through waves without capsizing. But if the engine stops, the ship loses control and starts turning sideways, and one large wave striking a defenseless ship broadside can capsize it in seconds. Remember this date, March 23rd. It's not the first time it's appeared in this story. 2 years before that ship blocked Suez, on that very same date in 2019, the cruise ship Viking Sky was sailing from Tromsø to Bergen, off the coast of Hustadvika, Norway, in the middle of a forecasted storm. The rough seas shook the lubricating oil tanks of the generators so violently that the supply cut off instantly. Sensors detected dangerously low levels and automatically, for safety, shut down every engine at once. A total blackout at the worst possible moment. 1,373 people on board, with no propulsion, no steering, drifting slowly toward the rocks while furniture, tables, and Dishware slid from one side of the lounges to the other. Many passengers, mostly elderly, believed the ship could capsize at any moment. The captain sent a desperate mayday over the radio. According to the official Norwegian investigation, the ship came within the distance of a single hull length of running aground on the rocky coast. It took 39 agonizing minutes to regain enough power to maneuver safely again. Nearly 500 people had to be evacuated one by one, hanging from cables, hoisted up by rescue helicopters while the ship kept rocking between the waves in the pouring rain. Investigators described it as an incident with real potential to become one of the worst maritime disasters of the modern era. The rest of the passengers and crew finally made it to port, towed in for repairs. That ship was a passenger cruise liner, not a cargo carrier, but that's exactly what makes the lesson so clear. On the high seas, a running engine isn't a luxury or an engineering indulgence. It is, quite literally, a life insurance policy for everyone on board. So does this heart ever truly rest? Of course it does, but only when three conditions are met at once: land nearby, plenty of time, and safe sea conditions. When a ship docks in port for a long stay to load or unload cargo, the main engine shuts down with no rush at all. The auxiliary engines take over, keeping the lights, the pumps, and life on board running normally. The boiler warms the fuel calmly, with no urgency whatsoever. Before setting sail again, the whole system is reactivated gradually, while the compressors take their time recharging. The 12 reserve air bottles, the most delicate repairs like replacing that cylinder liner, also happen here, docked, never in the middle of the ocean. Sailors have a name for that calm, unhurried shutdown, inherited from the age of coal. When a ship docked, the fire was left to die out, and the iron of the engine was allowed to truly cool completely until it was cold to the touch. That's how the golden rule was born, the one that sums up everything you've seen today. Out on the open ocean, a ship's heart can never afford to stop beating, because a single shutdown at sea means 3 simultaneous blows. A blow to the wallet, hours of reheating, and tons of fuel wasted just on the restart. A blow to the engine itself, thermal shock, microcracks, and a strictly limited number of starting attempts. And a blow to the safety of everyone on board. Total loss of control, exactly where. Nobody can reach you in time. This golden rule has stood intact for half a century, but right now, at this very moment, it's being truly tested. In 2020, new international regulations forced a sudden cut in marine fuel sulfur content from 3.5% down to just 0.5%. The old king fuel, cheap and dirty for decades, finally began wobbling on its throne. In 2023, the world's first large container ship capable of sailing on methanol appeared. Months later, another 16,000 container ship set sail using the exact same dual fuel system. By late 2024, a third ship underwent literal open-heart surgery in a shipyard, its original engine replaced with one capable of burning methanol in just 3 months of intense work. By early 2025, 25 methanol-powered ships were already in active service, with more than 200 under construction across various shipyards. But even their own owners openly admit these new hearts still demand too much maintenance to be perfect. Further out, on the horizon, engines capable of burning ammonia, a fuel with not a single carbon molecule, are already being tested. Though it still poses serious toxicity risks for the crew, the fuel changes, the chemistry changes completely. But one thing has stayed exactly the same for 60 years. In the middle of the ocean, no heart, old or new, can afford to stop beating, not even for a single second. Now let's pull the camera all the way back until we can see the entire planet. More than 80% of world trade by volume travels by sea. The phone in your hand, the clothes you're wearing, the coffee you had this morning, almost certainly at some point they crossed an ocean inside a ship with a heart that never sleeps, sailing through the night while you were fast asleep. Large ships don't switch off their hearts, just as the human heart never truly knows how to rest. What looks, at first glance, like pure waste is, in reality, the most efficient combustion engine ever built by human hands. It isn't negligence. It isn't carelessness. It isn't some engineer's whim. It's the most precise science that exists, the science of money and survival running in perfect synchrony.